Welcome to the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Hey there, all you future Terminites and Terminusers, or whatever you want to call us. We'll just go with citizens of Terminus. Welcome to episode 80 of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. You have arrived at our weekly podcast that covers everything Pantheon Rise of the Fallen to keep you and us, Pantheon, patient. This week, we've got the November producer's letter to break down. We've got a back and forth about Pantheon's plans for mounts. And we continue our tale of the ogres in Terminus in the Lore You Know segment. So hop in your escape pod and open the bay doors and hit that launch button and let me, Theric, and my spacefaring co-host, Desrin, provide an hour of entertainment on your descent to the planet Terminus on this week's Rewind. So, Desrin, you may have detected a space theme in my intro there.
Yeah.
There's actually a reason for that. I'm watching Foundation on Apple TV right now. And I've been feeling the space vibe a little bit this week. And I know you're a big space fan, so figured you might enjoy that. But have you watched the show? Do you know about Foundation?
You know, I just heard about it, like not even a couple weeks ago. It's funny you even mention it because it's kind of on my pertinent list of shows to go into.
You should watch it. It's pretty good. It's based on the novels by obviously a legendary writer Isaac Asimov. I haven't read the novels, but so one of the things that I learned in watching the show, which was pretty cool, is that one of the main set pieces is a planet called Terminus.
Oh, perfect.
Right. And I mean, there's people probably listening to this right now going, yeah, of course, who doesn't know that? But I didn't know that. So of course, when it comes up on screen, I'm like, oh, the planet Terminus. And of course, don't get me wrong, one has absolutely nothing to do with the other. This is like 50 years ago he wrote these novels. So it's clearly no relation. But my mind, I'm like, there's a weird multiverse, where this is actually our future MMO home. And, I'm seeing it on the screen and I'm looking for like a Spriggan to show up or something like that. So that's that's my imaginings of the week, if you will. But what about you? What delusions have you been having this week to keep you busy?
Honestly, this week I have in my spare time actually gone down like a similar space hole or something.
Yes, nice. So a similar space hole.
It's funny you even mentioned that. I do, maybe secretly hope there's some like multiverse where like Jan is actually following up the works of Isaac Asimov and this is his like tribute or something. But no, just there's a lot of hype going around, with getting really close to testing Starship for SpaceX's Starship like fully, and that's just going to be really monumental. Falcon Heavy is getting set to go off again, and the only reason I would ever want to be in Florida again would be to watch that. So, but I'm hyped. So maybe it's just a space week, space month. I don't know. It's in the air.
Awesome, man. Space week, space month, almost as good as Shark Week as we used to enjoy. Yeah, great, man. That's awesome. So we're
Speaking
both in the
sharks.
Same. Yeah. Speaking of sharks, yeah. What's the connection?
Oh, I was trying to segue like not so smoothly into our adventuring party.
Oh, I see. Okay, they're sharks. I got you. Okay, yeah. So let's feed the hungry sharks that are our adventuring party this week. We've got Shuriken on the Dwarf Cleric, Redbeard Flynn on the Darkmer Enchanter, Jason on the Scar Beard Lord, Daimlos on the Darkmer Enchanter, Zergjerk on the Dwarf Rogue, Joel Brown on the Scar Shaman, Ziplox on the Darkmer Rogue, Sparrow the Elf Ranger, and Bounty Code on the Human Wizard. And as you can see on the screen, the graphic, that Sparrow's work again. She does an amazing job helping out with the graphic for this. So thank you to everybody who is joined the party, and we really appreciate it. It's always fun to have that during the premiere and get the hype train going. And it's a good thing that we don't limit the group size to 4 because some MMOs like to do that. Final Fantasy 14. But we've got a solid group here, and there's always room for more. So if you want to support the show, you can donate through the super chat here on YouTube during the premiere, or through Patreon if you're checking us out on audio only. We always appreciate that, and have new folks are always welcome, but of course never required, because community is our currency, and that's just hanging out with us is all we need to keep the engines firing on our voyage through space, right, Des?
Oh, that was so beautifully put there.
I've really got this intro thing down. I think I really feel like I'm just putting it all together today.
We're having themes now. Like, this is
Yeah.
professional.
Well, you're up next week, so get your
We'll
thinking
see.
cap on and figure out a theme.
I'm sure it'll have nothing to do with American Thanksgiving.
Yeah, yeah, right, I'm sure. So having said that, let's get the show on the road. This week in Visionary Realms News and Notes. Okay, so VR News and Notes, we have a lot to dig into. This was the week we got the producer's letter, so let's get right to it. We got Joppa and Tehom giving us the latest and greatest this week. And right off the bat, the main thing that the letter starts talking about is the combat update, which they touched on in the October letter, but they gave us a little bit more specificity this time. It was broken down into what exactly this combat update was all about. And we're gonna take this in three aspects. The first one is ability adjustments. So what they were talking about in the newsletter here is how they're trying to get away from the really routine rotation-based play when it comes to limited action games or with tab target games, and moving towards, and I'm going to quote them, they said, tactical decision-making, teamwork, and conscientious resource management. And going on to say that they want to emphasize the costs, benefits, and risks when you use an ability, creating these, quote, inflection points. So, there's been mention of this before because, we are very notorious for getting into these standardized rotations when we play MMOs that are tab target, knowing what they're, the optimal way of doing them. So Desert, I wanted to talk about this for a minute with you because one of the things I enjoy the most about MMOs and the other games really for that matter is the tactical use of your skills. And Drac and I were talking this week about our mutual love. We didn't know it, but we both love the modern XCOM games. And in my opinion, those are close to as one of the best tactical, strategic tactical turn-based games that is out there right now. And how to use skills in a really smart and creative way. I love it when games ask you to, experiment, find creative ways to use your skills. And MMOs, I find, I want that level of creativity, but I do find it lacking sometimes. It's pretty clear, like I said, what the intended ordering of your skills is, and that can be a bit of a disappointment. So I like what they said in the newsletter here. I like how they're focusing on taking it to the next level, finding some creativity and not being so sort of paint by numbers. Desmond, what was your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of a evolution forward of the combat system, kind of still riding on that same vision of what they want combat to really be like. And this seems to be more on the character side, which is understandable, that they're working on ability systems and still building classes and stuff like that. It seems kind of unremarkable to me, but when it comes to the rotation stuff, I feel like no matter what, there's going to be a rotation, right? Like people are going to have rotations, but
right.
If you make it to the point where like you can actually mess up by doing just the same rotation, I think to other turn-based games, like Final Fantasy or whatever, that, sometimes one strategy, like even just taking a half a second to think about what you're using will make the fight go so much better. And I feel like that's kind of what they're going for, but I think it's more on the NPC side. So I really want to see the next evolution of NPC sides of that, because they could, try to make players, have all these nuances with their skills. But I think until it gets to the point where, okay, this works for this mob, but then I go to this other guy and
Yeah.
it is so unoptimal that I actually have to think for once. Until we get to that point, I feel like this is just more just finishing the system, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I think the nexus here is when the advanced enemy AI meets this meets this effort that they're trying to really get these skills out of a standardized rotation. I think you're probably right. That's how it's going to happen, is when it comes together with the enemy AI to create those situations, or like they said, inflection points in these combat encounters. So that's music to my ears. I really, really like that update. The next thing they talked about was attributes and stat adjustments. So this was in terms of itemization, and I think it was interesting because it was sort of like a realization on their part. What they found was with the stats, quote, the tighter we constrain those numbers while enhancing their effects, the more we can ensure loot maintains value and integrity. So they were saying that they've overhauled really this aspect in terms of trying to promote desirability in items and with non-core attributes, and that's the key here. So again, part of the combat changes they're making, the improvements, refinements, is taking into account how stats are affecting items and item desirability. So again, I do think that this is a good idea. And if you're listening to this, like, let me ask you, like, how many times have you found an item in an MMO, but just you dismiss it because it doesn't have your core stat attached to it, right? Like, why would I ever, if I find a bow that has intelligence on it, and no dex, like, I look for dexterity. My eyes are now absolutely trained to look for dexterity because I always know that's my core stat, most of the time. And I think that there's something to this, and they've alluded to this before. There's been talk about, there's the joke about the strength wizard, right? Being able to push their fireballs harder.
Joke.
Oh, okay. Please explain.
No, I hope that's a thing. I don't want that to be a joke. I'm hailing back to, well, everybody get ready to take a drink. Vanguard, where you mouse over all your different attributes, and most classes could find use for pretty much everything. And also each attribute did 2-3 things for the most part. Mm-hmm. And I think that really helped kind of round out the attribute system. Of course, classes still went for certain things depending on their needs, but I would love to see, as they say, more nuanced or additional effects for certain classes to make certain stats maybe a little bit more appealing, to change, maybe even change your play style, kind of a thing. I mean, that's the dream, is that you could branch out and try something a little bit different to make a class not be exactly the same as, the other one in the group.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And you used, I think, the correct terminology there, because their quote was, what they want to do is they want to see even more nuanced benefits. And then again, quote, significant gains to the effects of buffs and debuffs that influence these stats. So, I guess, it's one of those things where they looked at the systems they had. They were finding that they were falling into maybe that I want to say trap, but more of the common tropes where you look for those items that only have your core stat, and they want to try and address that ahead of time. And it's interesting because, like you talked about, other games have done this. Vanguard is your go-to. I think Final Fantasy XI sort of has has a good reputation for hidden stats, hidden substats, nuanced effects that aren't readily apparent. And that might not be exactly the same thing, but I think the idea is there. That's what makes things interesting and makes some items more desirable if they have some of these nuanced effects.
Yeah, I'm not as much a fan of hidden stats, really. I really desperately hope that they make a lot of this user facing, because anything that draws a person out of game, which is what's going to happen if there's hidden stats and mechanics and stuff like this, the less immersive, the less in the world they are. And so, if they take the route of adding like these, neat special effects, I just hope that they put them on the items to some degree, so that you don't constantly have to not know what it does and then leave the game to find out,
Yeah, interesting. I don't know. I think I don't necessarily agree with that 100%, or that maybe that's not the effect it would have on me necessarily, but I can appreciate what you're saying in terms of keeping it in the game in some way, shape, or form. They talked about class identity with regard to these combat adjustments, combat changes. And this was more of general, but they said basically they're refining some of the class skills and even removing some of them to better differentiate the classes. And the example they gave was removing some of the wizards' debuff spells, because or the ones that they do have, making them so they don't land as reliably as the enchanters. So this just seems like a common sense thing. I guess it's one of those things where you sort of give them everything to start, and then start removing and shaping it as time goes on, removing some of the overlap between the class skills. Probably something that is as a result of PA testing, and something I would say future PA testers out there should be mindful of in any upcoming test or alpha or beta tests or anything like that, because this is where we're going to feel class identity a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, one of my passion pieces of the project is the emphasis on class identity. Mm-hmm. And, the more spread of different things that one class or one player, of course, can do, the kind of less group centric it is. And so I imagine, if your wizard has a fire debuff and fire spells, it's just so obvious, that it kind of takes away a bit. Whereas if, another class had a great fire debuff and grouped with wizard, they would know, hey, this will actually super help the overall experience. I don't know if that's the approach they're taking. And of course, I'm not saying that classes should never have debuffs that help themselves, but in this particular example, you could see has like maybe they have ice debuffs because they've kind of stated ice is maybe more of the solo helpful kind of side. And that would make sense because that's something you can have on like your own like solo setup. But when it comes to like the big damage, like unleashing all of your potential, I think that should be more like group centric, or I would even say group reliant, to really release everything your class has to offer. I feel like you need other people.
Yeah. I just like the idea of them, sort of trimming, pruning, just continually shaping the class identity. I think over time you can really, they can really hone that down to a fine point where each class really feels it. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's in line with everything that we want, the tenets and everything that the community is interested in this game.
And this is the time to do it too, like taking away spells, right? Like it's not something
not later.
Do
do
in,
it now,
beta, right? like let's switch it up. Let's switch it up right now
before everybody can complain about it.
Don't want them to get too attached yet.
Yeah, and then so those are the sort of the combat update that they broke down. So if you want to know more, you can go check out the newsletter. But the big ticket item from this producer's letter is with regard to difficulty adjustments. Again, one of those core tenets with regard to challenge. So we'll set the stage here. I'm going to give you a quote to set the stage for this piece, because what VR said was, quote, "They're updating how player level influences player power," end quote. They noted that their prior formula with this was, again, quote, "incompatible with their goals for rarer, more iconic itemization, and that players felt inadequate if they hadn't been lucky enough to acquire certain upgrades." So the change that they've made, and according to the way I read it in the newsletter, is that players and enemies alike now receive base power increases when they gain levels. with this change and the attribute change to items we just talked about, they feel players are going to be able to better meet the challenges of the world, is the way that they put it. So, and then the last thing they say about this, it gives them a better design for incentivizing group play. And they said players, quote, should feel the world and their options expand as they grow. So, this is a feedback item, obviously, that comes from playtesting, comes from numbers, comes from player experience being, provided to them. And my first reaction when I read this was a little bit, took me aback a little bit. I don't know about you, Des, but I was a little bit hesitant because it wasn't exactly clear when they talked about player, and the key here is being enemies receiving power-based increases as their levels are gained. And I have this, scary thought of level scaling in my head now, where they're not talking about level scaling here, unless I'm completely misreading this. But I don't think that's what they're talking about, because they're not saying like the mob's level being relative to yours, or they're talking more about just their static level being increased based on their stats being more affected by their level. But it's a pretty big change, in all honesty, because they've always mentioned how they want to keep their numbers smaller, right? The more impactful numbers. Yeah. Sacred is their numbers guy, and he's been amazing from everything we've learned, and when we've talked to him, when he's been featured in their dev streams. He is a truly gifted when it comes to this kind of implementation, and I tend to trust his judgment with this. But what was your reaction when you read this, Desiree? I'm curious, because I think this is very much in your wheelhouse.
I kind of had a bit of a gut reaction as well, though I didn't tie it to level scaling. I more was just thinking a static increase to overall power per player or NPC level. And because I'm coupling this along with, the idea that we probably get stats, every level or every so levels, or however, they want to do that.
Right. That's the way I'm seeing it for sure. Yeah.
Well, so those are the choices that we have, right? But this seems like an overall power increase. And my gut reaction is, I don't know. Because we are getting a power increase through the stats we can assign. And so, well, I definitely trust, their judgment, to make it feel good. I feel like that general power increase, unless it's really minor, I'm usually not super for, because then it means, you could potentially be no gear on, and, a low level mobs are just still no match for you at all, even without all of your stuff. And I really like the idea that any benefits or weaknesses that our characters have are of our own doing. Yeah. And so knowing that my character is just going to innately get powerful as I level, in addition to getting gear, putting my own stats in, I just feel like it's taking a little bit away. So I'm a little bit hesitant to be all in on this, although I do trust Sacred. I do trust the balance, folks working on balance. I just, initial reaction was a little,
Yeah, I know. And that's the thing too. And, it depends on how it's implemented. It depends on how those stats are distributed, what kind of agency you have in that process. Whenever you're talking about, power increases and challenge level balancing, challenge level overall, that's why I said this is a big change, and this is potentially something that is going to require, again, quite a bit of feedback for them. Again, like you said, with class identity and skills, better to do this change now and see how it resonates, see how it feels, and go from there. But I do think it's interesting, right? I do think that they saw a need to make players feel they can push further out into the world. I think that's one of the keys, the key takeaways here that I hear. So, and that's what they really want players to adventure. They want players to explore and push their boundaries a little bit. We'll talk about this a little later, but with regard to the death penalty, but being wary of that, but also being like, not being completely intimidated to not try to explore. So
Yeah.
I guess wait and see, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah.
So let's update the roadmap to alpha. Again, this is their tracker to show people what stage certain aspects in development are towards hitting their alpha goal. So what's been updated this month? There was quite a bit of stuff. Some of it was a little mundane. Some of it we talked about already, actually. So I don't want to rehash that. So I'll just pick on a couple things here. The zones, they said work on the gate has begun. And you'll recall that was a high-level dungeon in Wild's End that they showed a couple streams ago. But that's fun. And I think Black Rose Keep got updated to 75% completed. If I'm remembering correctly, it was at 50% the last time we saw it. They said coasts and seafloor also at 75% so this is in terms of conversion from gray box to sculpted terrain,
Right.
like we saw in that video. So making progress there. And this other one kind of made me laugh. This was animations. They said completed, and this is quote, humanoid hovering animations when wielding weapons. So do you have a theory on this? It sounds like a Matrix thing to me.
No,
Maybe
I know. I think I know what they mean, but like what it inspires is like the sibling that's like standing inside of the door to your room, and they're like, I'm not in your room. But
yeah, I know,
well,
right?
I think what they mean is like idle animations, I believe. But hovering animations, they used a different word, and I don't know. Maybe they mean idle, maybe they mean something else, but
maybe it's gnomes. It's always gnomes, right? It's always gnomes. Something to do with
gnomes.
them. Yeah. So that was the roadmap to alpha updates. There's, like I said, there's more of them, so you can go read those as well. But again, it's a good tracker. The AMA, so their dev stream was the Ask Me Anything, and we talked about this last week. But I got to give myself a little pat on the back here because I suggested during this stream that maybe they could take some of the questions that weren't answered, be part of the producer's letter, and guess what? It's exactly what they did. So. Yeah, Minus, you're welcome. I'm happy to help out anytime you need advice on how to help you come up with content. So if you had a question during the AMA stream that didn't get answered, go over to the official forums because that's where they're posted. There's tons of good ones. We're not going to get into all of them here, but Desert, I know you have some that you want to go over. So why don't you hit some highlights here?
Sure. And I mean, I gotta really commend the effort here. Like, this is totally above and beyond, completely unexpected, but so welcome. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I feel like Minus probably was a champion of this, being, directly from the community on the content side. Like, this was just really great. And I mean, I hope it didn't take too much of the guy's time to, catch up on this, because we got answers from tons of the team. It's crazy. But yeah, it's awesome. As far as the answers, we not really a lot of like new stuff, honestly. But a lot of, answers that people apparently had questions for. And so there's a ton there. But the two I picked out, I'll real quick go over this, was one was from Archbishop, asking if surnames would be unlockable at later levels, which I don't really think about surnames too much as being like a highlight feature, but thinking about them unlocking actually was kind of a big deal in like EQ2 early days, because you get it at level 20. You don't start with surname. So you see someone running around with one name and you already kind of know that they're below level 20.
It was a big deal in EQ1. It was a huge deal in EQ1. And I was definitely looking forward to my last name in EQ1.
Right. It specifically was important for me in EQ2 because level 20 was also, or originally, where you finally got into your subclass. And so you kind of got this, like, you got your last name, you got your, final class. And it kind of felt like a little sense of arrival, like
Yeah.
It's kind of silly, but just those things culminating together, it seemed like you suddenly became legit, you know?
Yeah. You're now legit. You're an official citizen of the world with a last name.
Right. But Joppa, directly answer this. We're definitely fans of unlocking surnames as a mean of prestige. So, I mean, that's not us saying it will, to be clear, but I love that they're fans of that. Now, the other one is a little more drawn out, but worth mentioning anyway. This was from Maravik Vralt, asking how many quests we would see, knowing that Pantheon isn't for like the WoW style progression through questing. Joppa gave a surprisingly distilled answer that I really liked, because it drills on a few things that I find really important. I mean, the quest design of this game is a major deal for me. Like, I don't want to go through the WoW quest grind again. Like it just.
I think it's a big deal for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. But so quoting Joppa here, a significant amount of game content will be centered around tasks, big T, perilous tasks, and storylines. We approach tasks as the more mundane jobs that an NPC might ask you to do for them if you inquire. These could result in a bit of coin, a small amount of experience, an item reward, a means of increasing your reputation, or any combination of the above. Perilous tasks represent more dangerous quests that will usually require more than one player to band together in order to succeed. With perilous tasks, the potential rewards will definitely be, commensurate with the risk. When I read this in practice, I said that with no problem. And I was like, oh man, I'm such a pro. But
you still did pretty well. I probably would have screwed it up. I know Minus would have screwed it up. You did a good job.
But and finally, storylines are unique to the perception system and will be a primary means through which players will progress as keepers and unlock the vast lore of Terminus. An important thing to emphasize when talking about Pantheon's specific vision towards questing is that we are committed to creating a non-linear experience, giving the player a deep sense of sovereignty in how they approach this sphere of content. Now, I mean, I got to shout this out again, because I love that they're splitting this out into tasks, right? Like tasks, perilous tasks, storylines, because it always makes me think of this like Twitter post that Crow Singer had a while back of like, why are these called quests? This is not a quest, But one of the kind of pinpoint things I saw in here was he did mention a small amount of experience for tasks. So
right. Yeah. I mean, this is a really good post. There's a lot of information here, and actually, I hadn't actually read through this completely in all the detail before you just read it now, and it's very interesting. I actually had a question during the AMA that Redbeard Flynn had asked me to put out there because he couldn't attend, and it was basically this: like, how much should we expect in terms of experience gain to get from questing, or is it going to be more grinding focused? Like, what's the balance going to be there, and are we going to be leveling from questing? So this actually answers that quite well. I always look at it this way. This is the way I see it: is that the storylines are primary, like they're the main thing. They're the big show. That's what we're here for, right? And I see these other things as sort of being like, sort of the pregame, the warm-up show, the warm-up act. You know what I mean? I look at them very much as standard. Like we've done this in a lot of MMOs, these types of tasks and perilous tasks where you've got quests separated into solo and group quests, right?
Pretty much,
so
yeah.
I kind of see them as being so, and I'm not like against it. I'm not like I'm fine with it, but I'm here for the storylines. I don't really, that other stuff is kind of like not that exciting.
Yeah, I will say, like, all of this sounds great except for the XP for the regular tasks, because when I see tasks like that, and he even basically mentions that that's like the what we typically think of as like MMO quests, so I'm thinking kill 8 whatevers and collect their what was the oh man, we had a funny pelts. Yeah.
bat wings.
Bear asses, right? Was that?
Oh, the bear asses. I thought you were going to say stingers because that was last week, I think.
Oh yeah, no, I've moved on. No more wasp.
No more
talk.
stingers.
But and I think if that gives any XP, I'm gonna feel obligated to grab those like all the time.
Yeah, and that's something we've mentioned before as being one of those things where you can't pass up any opportunity for experience, even if you don't like to do it. And like, so I guess, yeah, I mean that's kind of a
especially in a game where progression is slow, though. Like, that's the thing for me is like if there's any more or less free experience to be had, it's probably going to be had. So again, my mind is open. I have a good amount of trust, but seeing those words, I was like,
yeah. Oh, well, we'll wait and see. Maybe we'll get a better sense of how it actually shows up when the time comes. But I'm really glad you brought that question forward. That was a great question to get answered, and I certainly think it's valuable. Again, everybody go over to the forums, the official forums, and you can find all the answers for all the questions that were asked during the AMA stream if you didn't catch it live. So other news, just to finish up our VR news and notes, they created a new podcast called Parting the Veil. And this is where Minus and Joppa, in this one, episode 1, they talked about Pantheon's reputation as a niche game in the MMO space. And we'll get into that. But after you listen to it, Drac and I actually did a breakdown of it. So I don't want to rehash it all here. But we did a new video called Theric and Drac React, where we sort of hit our highlights from it. So go check that out. And then last but not least from the newsletter, they highlighted community member and friend of the show, Bronson, whose artwork is on screen right now, and you should be seeing it. We actually got a little bit more from Bronson. So we've got some more to show you this week, which is awesome. He is an amazing artist. We're certainly lucky to have him in the community. Bronson and I are kind of have a kindred spirit because we're both have a love for the old point and click adventure games back from the days of the big box PC games. We both come from that sort of era of time when we were in our heyday back then. So I've had the pleasure of chatting with him quite a bit about that, and I feel a bit of, like I said, kinship with him. Plus we're both old, so just sort of
wait, I'm surprised you didn't read the line that you had here, because
what did I have?
You have, I think we're of the same vintage. So,
yeah, I did say that. You're right.
You definitely condensed that a little bit, but I have to rat you out for that, because that's just a good line.
Saying you're of the same vintage as somebody even makes it worse. That makes you feel way older. Like that's like I'm like some sort of like wine connoisseur with like a wine cellar, and like not the wine connoisseurs are all old people, but like I don't know. For me in my mind, that just makes me feel way older. So I edited it out. Anyway, go read up about Bronson's journey from gamer to creator on the newsletter and check that out. So. That's it for VR News and Notes, but the Pantheon Plus update this week, we have our calendar. You should be seeing it on the screen right now, I'm hoping, because I didn't have it at the time we're recording, so I'm hoping I get it before I put the video together for this, but there should be some content coming. One of the things I know that has already gone up is Drac's top 5 money-making schemes in MMOs. So I had no idea Drac was such a maven of MMO finance, and now I must take advantage of him. So he's listed out his top 5 money-making schemes from every MMO he's ever played, and it's a pretty hilarious read. So go check it out. Also got Crowsinger with some new fan fiction, as you mentioned, Des. She's a great writer, articles and fan fiction. Wizen has some fan fiction up there this week. So again, go over to Pantheon.plus to read all about it. And that's it for this week's news and notes. When the Pantheon community speaks, we listen. So let's dig into the forums and fan projects to see what the discussion's all about.
This week's community discussion comes from the one and only GoofyWarriorGuy on the official forums. Can you guess? It's about the bean that Joppa dropped during the Parting the Veil podcast.
Yep.
And if you haven't seen that yet, and you don't know what I'm talking about, it has to do with mounts, so brace yourselves here. So, but first off, huge props to GoofyWarriorGuy for the formatting of this post. It is beautiful. It makes me happy. Not only does he text quote Joppa in the main post, but even adds a link to a time-stamped video for the quote.
Gotta
Like,
love that.
oh my, so yeah, so sorry, a little fanboying here, but like,
Making life easy.
Oh, it tickles me so much when people like format their stuff so nicely and, you know, reference. Oh my goodness, you're a champion. You're a champion.
A warm, fuzzy feeling.
Anyway, the quote from Joppa, and again, this is from the Parting the Veil podcast, and the quote goes like this: "When we are able to unveil what we're hoping and planning to set up as a free mounting system, where you're able to, through a particular riding skill and perhaps items, be able to mount certain creatures in the world freely and ride them for a period of time."
Ooh.
Oof. So as
That's a
Goofy,
bean.
yeah, big, right? As Goofy Warrior Guy points out, I should just start calling him GWG or something. I don't know.
Yeah, GWG. There you go.
There are some kind of keywords in that, you know, quote, like hoping and planning and perhaps, which are always good to kind of keep in mind. But the drop was still quite a surprise to a lot of folks, especially in how it was described. So Goofy Warrior Guy's thoughts were that it would be some kind of like taxi system where the mounts have like set routes that could potentially take you to places that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get to, or just across an area quickly. Of course, it could just be a temporary, like speedy way to traverse around freely as well. But with the little bit that we have here, what are your first thoughts there? Like, where does your mind wander when you hear this being dropped?
Well, my mind wanders to I don't know about this. I'm a little bit hesitant to say that I think it's a good idea, because I'm always being mindful of, does it impact anybody's class abilities? Does it impact interdependence on other players in any way? Again, I know VR is mindful of this. This is not something they've just like, oh yeah, we forgot about that. You know, like of course they're mindful of that. I don't know. I feel like I would be challenged. I feel like I'd want to participate in it. I'd want to find mounts and level up any skills and find items that could help with this kind of thing. I'd like to see how they do it, and I'd like to see how prolific it is. I guess that was, if I had to boil it down to a certain point, like how much of this is there going to be? Is this for like one area, like once a zone, there's only one place where you can actually do this, or is this multiple points? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm interested.
It's definitely an interesting concept, especially in its vagueness, right? But for me, and I don't want to talk too much about the podcast itself, but it makes me think directly to a point that Joppa was trying to make, in that they're setting out to make an adventure game. And I think that harkens back to, you know, old adventure games from, you know, kind of the classic, a lot of our like growing up era, right? And first thing I think of is it's like, you know, Zelda, Mario, like Spyro, or any of like the classic kind of adventure experiences that had temporary mount mechanics for one reason or another. I love thinking about it, because a lot of times these games, they gave kind of like an additional purpose to the mounts. So they weren't just for like going fast. They were more for like specific puzzles or like a special traversal. And I think that's kind of what Goofy Warrior Guy is getting at. And I think I like it. I think it actually does add to the adventure side, especially if it's, you know, shored up. Like it's not just, oh, I can just ride this all around the zone and it's like, you know, pretty fast and all that. I feel like that's way too one-sided, and it would negatively affect the game quite a bit. But if, you know, there was a area that had some, you know, fun like glider creatures that you see like, you know, running around, and then you get to a certain point in the game where you can like call upon those to like come swoop and pick you up and take you to a place that you've never been able to get to normally in the past. That sounds kind of like, that puts me in the world, you know, it kind of puts me in the world, especially if it's an option and not a requirement. like unless it's like some really, really important, thing. But if it was something where like you could get your climbing skill really, really, really high, or you could spend your time learning to befriend animals or however it works out so that the, rock crawler or some sort of creature is willing to, pick you up, take you up the wall. And as long as the equivalent investment is the same in both systems, I think it would be a really cool, like, option, like you got like one guy with his pick and, climbing picks going up the wall, that's what he's focused on. And then, the other person's like crawling along on a like spider or something.
Somebody just zooms by you on this rock crawling creature of some sort.
Hey, if they earned it, I mean,
that's what I was going to say is how do you earn it? Like what's the investment here? Like what do I have to do to get this? Is there something that's asked of me, or is this just a finding something and I find it once and then I can use it every time? There's a little bit of a Guild Wars 2 does this a little bit, where they've got the creatures that you have different types of mounts in Guild Wars 2, and a lot of them are required for certain areas to get to certain places. Like there's some of the points of interest, you require a certain mount to get there. So they do that a little bit, and it's not really all that great, to be honest with you. I didn't enjoy it that much. I don't know. I again, like, as long as it's not taking the place of a rogue throwing down their rope, or a druid creating a bridge, or a summoner creating a raft, right? Like,
yes,
don't take the place of that, because that's a problem.
Yeah. If I could condense it down, I would say if it's controlled and it's just an option, not like a only way to do the thing. I could see it as being a nice puzzle like piece, rather than, you need to do this.
It also gives you another, like, if there's some sort of itemization attached to it where you have to find the golden reins.
Oh, yeah.
They're a rare drop in Halnir Cave, and you have to find them to be able to, mount the stag in Fairthale Forest. Like,
oh yeah,
that's
totally.
Cool.
Or even if they're like no rent items, right? Like a flute or something that, you can call it a certain place that will, they will come and pick you up and then drop you off, and it expends the flute or something like that. Starts to create a lot of possibility. And especially if, you get some item that you're like, oh man, like what could this be for? Where could this potentially take me? That kind of actually gets interesting. Sure. But anyway, let's get some, responses here. So we'll start with Ixar. Ixar adds that it really likes the idea of mounts not just appearing underneath you, as we've kind of gotten used to, that you would have to seek one out.
That's a great point. Not just summoning it from your inventory and all of a sudden you're mounted riding around.
Whatever,
exactly.
If they have a particle effect or none at all, you're just like, suddenly there's a thing under my legs.
Where did this come from?
So I'm definitely with him on that. I do like the whole, like, you have to seek one out. Like the seeking would actually be the fun part, I think, for me.
Sure. Agreed.
If this was in. Now let's get to this. So Vandrad is not so excited about the mounts.
Shocking.
Yeah. And actually, LaFale and Kalindil as well, like, not super happy to be hearing about mounts. And I will say, LaFale kind of relents a little bit, later in the thread, but there's definitely a decent split of people that really shy away from the mounts idea. And I think I get it. Like, I
do too. I do. I totally get it. I totally get it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely like the kind of person that, like, when they put rift stones and the really cheap flying mounts that you could rent for 15 minutes in Vanguard, like, that absolutely, like, destroyed the world for me. So,
well, you've talked about a lot about how one of the best quests in Vanguard was to get the
Griffin.
The Griffin, right?
Yeah. Yep. And that was just immediately like, nah, so much for that.
Yeah.
But but then we'll get to Counterflesh here. adding that it'd be nice to be able to specialize in certain creature types for these temporary mounts, perhaps increasing the duration as you gain skill. They also point out a potential problem, which would be like limited availability. Though they're temporary, it could lead to areas being void of a certain creature as players have their romp. So this would be in the kind of case where it's more of like a taming thing, like a temporary tame. And you could imagine going into a place that usually has like a bunch of, I don't know, elk or something, and suddenly there are no elk because like everyone's running around on their temporary elks, you know?
Yeah, I like that though. I think that's a good thing. I don't see that as a negative. I see that as being, you know what, there's no elks here because this is useful and people are engaging with it. So I got to go find a panther to ride on. Like I got to go somewhere else. Like,
Okay.
Limited supply, create that demand, create that tension.
It does create some dynamism in the world, doesn't it?
Yes,
It makes me think back, and hopefully some people have heard of this before, but there was when they were developing Ultima Online, they created this ecosystem kind of system where, you know, there was predators and prey and all this stuff. And they realized that they literally couldn't put that in the game because players would just throw the balance off so bad. But that's what it made me think of, though.
I remember that. Like, you're right. Yeah, you don't foresee these interactions, but sometimes, you know, they're good and sometimes they're not so great. But yeah, that's a great example. I remember that.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, we're looking at temporary, limited availability. You know, we're trying to shore this in, which I think is a common theme with even the people that want to see this, is that like it needs to be very restricted, right? Right,
exactly.
Yeah, I think so. Jothany posts here, and I think this mirrors more or less where I'm at. And Jothany says, I'll wait for more information before making a judgment call, but it could be an interesting bit of gameplay as long as they don't simply make them a reliable form of long distance travel, at least not at release. I think that sums it up pretty much for me.
Yeah, I mean, like we didn't even talk about this. Drac and I didn't even mention this in our reaction video to the Parting the Veil because it was so vague and so like it wasn't really attached to the main theme of episode 1. So we knew it was there and we were both, you know, we both heard it, but we just didn't talk about it because it's just, again, like they said in the initial post, Goofy Warrior Guy said, you know, there are definitely some qualifiers here that they're thinking about, they want to, they're hoping, you know, that kind of thing. So fun to speculate on, but we don't really know anything.
Right. And yeah, this is a lot of extrapolation, but this is, I would think, something that they would want to have their eyes on, because the way that Joppa described it in the podcast was kind of fresh, at least to me. It wasn't just like, oh, we're thinking about maybe putting mounts in. No, it was like, we're looking into a kind of like, you know, free mounting, you know, it's like the way he described it aligned with that adventure like mindset that I was thinking. So, and like, lastly, because a lot of folks are like, you know, mounts bad. Ixar and Jintoki88 here point out that mounts have been in the cards for a long time. They even denote back to the Kickstarter. And I think mounts being a huge deal in games like Vanguard were probably a big deal for Brad. But I think he probably had an idea of how to hone that in. And so while mounts might have been around for a while, you know, as an Amoebus idea, I kind of like them at least considering how to make it fresh and, you know, hopefully restricted.
Well, it's like you said, the way Droppa described it, he didn't just say, he could have said, oh, and by the way, we're thinking of having mounts in Pantheon. But he didn't say it like that. He said it like, we're having a free taming, free riding, mounting system. It's like very much from a designer aspect. So, you know, it's, again, they're not just plonking in mounts because they've been done in other games. Like, you got to trust the team to not do it in a way that is been done a million times before, and do it in a smart way. Like you said, evolving it, taking Brad's vision for it, and implementing it in a way that doesn't damage the game, doesn't damage the goals of Pantheon.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good note, in that if they put this in, I have pretty high confidence that it would definitely be an evolution in the genre that, like, we really haven't had. There is no mount evolution, really. Like,
well, and if you're listening to this and if you're thinking to yourself, well, if they put mounts in, then we're going to get flying mounts. I'm here to tell you, Joppa has been 100% clear. As long as he is a member of the team, Pantheon will not have flying mounts.
Yeah, written 100%. On his grave, man. Like,
yeah, he's got a tattooed on his forehead or something. I don't know.
Joppa, no flying mounts Perkins.
That's right. He's got it like on his knuckles, like one letter on each knuckle. No flying.
No fly.
Mounts,
That's what's
no fly.
5 letters there. No fly.
There you go.
So anyway, there's actually a ton more responses already. Big topic. Throw your ideas in there. I mean, this could roll somewhere, and the more ideas, the better. Check it out conveniently, in the show notes. But we should probably move on. Before actually we get to everyone's favorite part of the show, we did have another introduction, introduction. So this is another returning person, named Thunderstump. And they check in the Introduce Yourself subforum on the official forums to say that they've been lurking a while, and like many, they're looking for a new home, sans EverQuest. So, I mean, we've heard this a lot. I love seeing a lot of like lurkers poking their heads back in, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And I love it. They even noted, they've seen a lot of positive like community interaction and stuff like that. So proud of everyone for that. But definitely welcome, Thunderstump.
Welcome.
Yeah, and feel free to throw your own welcomes and chat it up. His post there. So that is it for this week's community discussions.
Sit back and relax. It's time for the lore you know. So the phrase of the week last week for this segment was "my foe dies or we both do." That was the ogre mantra, and I think that resonated with a lot of people when we started our journey to the ogre lore last week, because today we're going to continue that. We're actually going to finish off I say finish. There's one more piece I have in mind for next week, but I'm going to keep that as a bit of a surprise for now to do with the ogres. But today is the final part of their main lore on the website. So let's get right to it and listen to the current state of the ogres on Terminus. When cast upon the naked land of Terminus, the frail bounds between the clans ruptured in haste. After eons of forced restraint, total war arrived. This scale of this conflict would have consumed the race had not a dark messiah risen from the chaos. Rothak, clan lord of the Black Moon tribe, took his tribe to a mountain ridge far to the south, claiming it called his name. Into this haunt he trekked alone, with the tome of the Black Moon, whispering that the secrets of the ruins could be opened therein. Missing for weeks, as the red ogres of Dark Sun assaulted the last of his men, Rothak emerged from the mists and shadows, forever changed. With the powers of an unlocked tome, Rothak declared himself the Black Moon King, making an unprecedented claim as lord over all 7 clans. In a ruthless campaign, he validated this title, slaying the 6 rival clan lords with his own hand. All opposition collapsed beneath the surging tide of the Black Moon, each tome taken in turn. In victorious froth, the king desecrated a sacred shrine of ancient Terminus, an ominous statue of a departed rainborn dragon. This monolith stood as a reminder of the latent authority of the planet, that of the bloodline of the Dragon King himself. Yet in one fearless stroke, the Black Moon King tore off the beast's jaw, casting the hulk at his feet, breaking its maw. In a display of gross mockery, the king set his throne inside the mouth of the disfigured regent. From that seat, he unleashed the unified ogre host upon the continent of Rainfall, though his ravenous eye cast out across the whole of the world. Yet this era of conquest was not to endure. the king was increasingly afflicted by the very powers he used to terrorize his foes. With muttering throat and eyes that never closed to sleep, observers believed the dark curse of the breached tomes wreaked a greater claim upon the king with each victory. When the ceaseless whispers wreaked too great a madness upon him, the undefeated king abdicated his throne and vanished. Leaderless, the ogres were unable to hold on to their blood-soaked gains. Against defeats, rivalry, and betrayal, their fabled instincts seemed to have fled with their king and his books. When the revenant forces fell upon Broken Maw, the reeling nation sought shelter in the burning sanctum, themselves devastated like any common race. In this current frail age, the ogres are pitched in battle again. Their bitter rivalry with the hounds of Waschay smolders afresh, requiring warriors born of the race's native ferocity, leaders who can unify the fractured host. Yet beneath those aims burns the reclamation of the tomes of war, a birthright stolen by their own native hand.
And that's the lore you know. So that was fun. I really enjoy doing that. And that one, I have to say, I recorded. I'm very happy with how that one turned out. The secret to recording those, I think I've told you this, Desert, is first thing in the morning. Morning. I definitely have morning voice for this kind of stuff. Afternoon, evening, not so much, but definitely for the morning. So, yeah. So that brings us to the end of episode 80. Desiree, you are a gentleman and a scholar, and I salute you, my friend, for joining me every week, and thank you so much, as always.
Salute.
Salute, yes. And thank you to everyone else for hanging out with us today. If you would be so kind as to always leave a like on the video, subscribe if you're not already, turn on notifications on our YouTube channel if you wouldn't mind. And then on your podcast platform, if that's how you take the show, then go and leave a review, writing, whatever stars, whatever metric your podcast platform utilizes. Check that out and do that. Helps the show get discovered for new community members and helps us do lots of fun stuff. So having said that, I hope everyone has a great week, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye, all.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Pantheon Plus is not affiliated with Visionary Realms. Be sure to check out our Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube channels under the name Pantheon Plus. You can follow Theric at Pantheon Theric on Twitter, and Desrin at DesrinDoes also on Twitter. And you can stay up to date with all things Pantheon at www.pantheon.plus. Until next time, cheers, and thanks for listening.